Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, Chairman of our board, Mr. Massimov, it's a great day for us. It's not every day that we have not only the dean of one of our key strategic partners at Nazarbayev University, namely the dean of the Kuan School, Mr. Kishore Mahbubani, who is dean of the one, as I mentioned, LKY School, which is the partner for our Graduate School of Public Policy. It's not every day that we have the dean of a strategic partner with us. It's even rarer that we have a dean with us who also talks to us about one of his recent publications. And you see it here in the title, ASEAN at 50. Now tell me, everybody knows what ASEAN is? Yes. All right, so it doesn't require any. So ASEAN at 50, and as you know, it was a very tough beginning 50 years ago for ASEAN. People didn't give it much chance, and now 50 years later, it is one where the integration has proceeded to a point where an economic community is being launched. So given these days that, in recent history, we've all been looking at the European Union and its experience, integration experience, and little has been said about the ASEAN experience. And now that because of Brexit, because of the Eurozone trouble, and so on, the Greek problem still hasn't really gone away. We all are wondering, in a way, what is the future of the European Union? And at such time to learn about what actually is happening in Asia with the 10 ASEAN countries and their integration pathway, I think is a very, very interesting topic for us to learn. And what better than having the author of the book presented to us, Dr. Kishore Mahbubani. As I indicated, he is the dean of the LKY School, but I think his claim to fame has been, I think, when he was a rising star in Singapore's foreign service, and in the early 2000s served 2 terms as ambassador to the United Nations in New York, and also was chairing the Security Council. So he's one of the few Asians that I know who was able to tell the Americans, the Russians, the French, the UK, the Chinese off at the time. It's not a small feat. But he has also since been recognized for his various publications. I detect increasingly more a philosophical bent in your writings as well. For his sins, he's also been appointed as advisor to the President's Council at Yale University. He's heading the geoeconomical section or the committee at the World Economic Forum. He was in 2000, I think, 14 or so, mentioned as one of the top 50 world thinkers by the Prospect magazine. And the Global Thinkers in 2010-11, that sort of is a recognition coming from the Foreign Policy magazine, included you as one of the top 10 or top 50 global thinkers at that time. He's very modest, he sort of only nods a little bit. Anyway, but enough of my introduction. We all look forward to Kishore, and he will give 25 minutes approximate presentation, and then thereafter we're going to open it up for your questions and comments. Let's have a great interactive discussion. Okay.
Thank you, Shigeo, for that very generous introduction. I also want to thank Chairman Karim Masimov. I'm really honored by your presence here. I remember our boss and having a conversation there. So I'm delighted to be back here in Nazarbayev University. Now, some of you who are alumni of the Lee Kuan Yew School and those who've heard me speak before, you may know that I only make 3 points in my lectures. But today I thought, in celebration of the fact that our school has now signed a new 5-year partnership today with the Graduate School of Public Policy, I will make 5 points in my remarks instead of 3 points. And it's also appropriate because, ASEAN is a 5-letter word set up by 5 countries 50 years ago. So the theme of 5 will be prevalent in my remarks today. And let me tell you what are the 5 points I hope to address in 25 minutes. The first question I hope to address is, why is the ASEAN story relevant to the world? And actually, I think the world is going to discover that the story of ASEAN is going to be a significant sort of guiding light for our future. Second question I want to address is why ASEAN should have failed. I'll give you 5 reasons why it should have failed. The third question I'll address is, why did ASEAN succeed? Here too, I'll give you 5 reasons why ASEAN succeeded. And then the fourth question is, what has ASEAN delivered? And finally, I also want to talk of my 5th point to address the question of what are the lessons for Central Asia from ASEAN. So you can see that I'm going to try and cover a lot of ground. So if I seem to be rushing a bit, I'm trying to get as many points as I can out in the short time here. But let me begin by addressing the big fundamental question. Why is the ASEAN story relevant to the world? And my simple answer is that the ASEAN story is relevant to the world today because the world is entering a completely new era of world history. And how do I characterize this new era of world history? 2 points. 1, it's the end of the era of Western domination of world history. But I hasten to add that the end of the era of Western domination is not the end of the West. In fact, the world still needs to see a very strong Western civilization carry on in the 21st century. But clearly, the capacity that the West had to dominate, to conquer the world, is gone. Now you're seeing the return of Asia. Indeed, the return of many successful Asian civilizations. So what it means for the chemistry of the world is that we are going to change fundamentally from a mono-civilizational world with one successful civilization to a multi-civilizational world. And trust me, we haven't handled that situation for 200 years. So going back to deal with a multi-civilizational world requires a whole new mindset, a whole new way of understanding the texture of the world. And you have to be able to understand different cultures and civilizations easily and effortlessly. And if you can't, you'll be handicapped because you cannot understand the 21st century. But to understand and figure out a multi-civilizational world, it would help us if actually we had a multi-civilizational laboratory that could teach us how to handle a multi-civilizational world. And here, by a stroke of good fortune, we have in Southeast Asia, among the 600 million people in Southeast Asia, the only multi-civilizational laboratory in the world. There is no other part of the world where you can find, say, among a collection of 600 million people, 240 million Muslims, 110 million Christians, 150 million Buddhists, 7 million Hindus, and you have Taoists, and you have Confucianists, and you have communists. Name me, do a quick mental tour of the world. Visit Africa, visit Latin America, visit Europe. Where would you find this kind of diversity? Nowhere. And that's why the story of ASEAN and the success of ASEAN actually produces a lot of hope for the world. And that's why the world needs to study ASEAN very carefully. And this is why my childhood friend and I, Jefferson, produced this book, ASEAN at 50, that was launched in Singapore 2 months ago. And this copy is from Mr. Massimo. I'll give it to him later. So let me turn to my second question. Why ASEAN should have failed? You know, ASEAN was founded on 8 August 1967. And I can tell you that when it was founded, everybody thought it's gonna fail. And there are at least 5 reasons why ASEAN should have failed very early on. Number 1, it had 2 predecessors, 2 efforts to set up Southeast Asian regional organizations. One was ASA and the other was Mafilindo. And both died within 2 years. So when ASEAN was formed, everyone thought, not a hope. And then at the same time, the region, second point, was in tremendous turmoil. And you know, the 5 founding members, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, had so many quarrels with each other. Indonesia had just ended confrontasi against Malaysia and Singapore. Malaysia and Singapore, which were one country for 2 years, just had a bitter divorce in 1965. Thailand was saying that Malaysia was supporting the separatists in southern Thailand, and Philippines was claiming a state, Sabah, of Malaysia. There were so many bilateral problems. Another reason why ASEAN should have failed. Third reason why it should have failed is because Southeast Asia, at that point in time in the 1960s, actually was far more trouble than the Middle East of today. You look at the Middle East of today, you look at Syria, you look at Iraq, you think, no way, no hope, right? Guess what? Southeast Asia at that time was far worse. The biggest war, right, since the Korean War was being fought in Southeast Asia, the Vietnam War, and when President Barack Obama went to Laos, he admitted, he said no country had as many bombs dropped on it per capita than Laos did. And I spent a year in Cambodia. I remember in 73, 74, the city was shelled every day. Southeast Asia was probably the most violent corner on planet Earth in terms of geopolitical contestation, in terms of conflict. And that should not have been the area for successful regional cooperation. And then the fourth reason why ASEAN should have failed is that, as I indicated earlier, Southeast Asia is by far the most diverse region on planet Earth. So if you're looking for the easy place to start regional cooperation, you go to maybe to Europe, maybe you go to the Arab countries, they're all the same. You go to Africa, they're all the same. But you don't go to Southeast Asia because we're all different. That's why it should have failed. And the fifth reason why it should have failed is that the ASEAN countries at that time were very poor. Really poor, developing countries with large pools of poverty and looked like hopeless cases in terms of development. So clearly, anyone living in Southeast Asia in 1960, watching the creation of ASEAN would have said, it can never succeed. And what's therefore remarkable is that for an organization that was destined to fail at its birth, has now emerged as the second most successful regional organization in the world after the European Union. So why did it succeed? And a large part of this book is an effort to explain why it succeeded. And once again, I'll give five reasons why it succeeded. The first reason is a four-letter word. It begins with F. Now, not the word you are thinking about. In fact, when I often ask people to guess, I'm surprised so few people guess that word, but I won't do it today. The correct word is fear. F-E-A-R. And I can tell you, I lived through it. I know it was real. In the 1960s, the 5 founding members were genuinely frightened that they will be swept away by a communist tide sweeping through the region. And at that time, as you know, when American senators spoke about Southeast Asia, they described the 5 founding members of ASEAN as dominoes waiting to fall as the communists expanded. So I can tell you that what brought these 5 quarrelsome countries together to create ASEAN was not a 4-letter word called love, it was a 4-letter word called fear that brought them together. And if this fear hadn't been there, they would never come together. The second reason why ASEAN succeeded, and this is purely an accident of history, is that they had good leaders, strong leaders that emerged. And in particular, it was a friendship between 2 leaders who were in office for 3 decades almost. And that formed the foundation for ASEAN. And it was one of the most unlikely friendships. It was between the President of Indonesia, President Suharto, and the Prime Minister of Singapore, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, after whom our school is named. And it was the most unlikely friendship in the world because President Suharto was a very typical Javanese. And Javanese culture is very unique, very subtle. So when President Suharto wants to say yes, he smiles like this. And when President Suharto wants to say no, he smiles like this. You can tell the difference, right? It's amazing. He is so Javanese. And Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was the exact opposite. He was a Cambridge-trained Anglo-Saxon lawyer who spoke far better English than any Englishman ever did. And that amazing two different cultures coming together in many ways paved the way for ASEAN. And other strong leaders, Dr. Mahathir from Malaysia was a strong leader, the Thais had some strong foreign ministers, and so leadership mattered a lot. The third reason why ASEAN succeeded was also because of a four-letter word, L-U-C-K, luck. And this is a long story, but all I can tell you is that history of our world is always driven by the main geopolitical currents. And through a stroke of luck, ASEAN ended up on the right side of history, initially working with the United States, and then working with the United States and China together in the 1980s. That's geopolitical luck. And that triangle of US, China, and ASEAN working together through the 1980s, and I was, by the way, at that time already in my first post as ambassador to the UN, and I experienced that firsthand, the close collaboration. And this triangle also made ASEAN very strong. That was luck. And of course, the fourth reason why ASEAN succeeded is because they made the right decision for their economic development. Now you must remember, in the 1960s and 1970s, it was not popular or fashionable for third world countries to open up their economies and welcome foreign investment. I know, even when I was ambassador to the UN in 1980s, even then, the third world countries were condemning foreign investment. This is imperialist exploitation. We reject foreign investment. But fortunately, the ASEAN countries said, no, 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 we need foreign investment. And so the rest of the world said no to foreign investment. ASEAN opened the doors to foreign investment, and I can tell you, remarkable results happened. And the fifth reason that ASEAN succeeded is a reason that none of you will ever guess. It's a four-letter word, beginning with G, and it's spelled G-O-L-F, golf. And you know, I know you laugh, but I'm dead serious. In my book, I actually quote the former Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore, the former Foreign Minister of Singapore, all saying that if we didn't play golf with each other, we would not have resolved many of the difficult disputes. And at first, I used to play golf with my ASEAN counterparts. And I can tell you, in the morning the meeting would begin, we would quarrel and argue about every sentence. And then you play golf in the afternoon, and then we have a few beers in the evening. And then I'll tell my colleagues, let's stop quarreling, disagree. The whole document, we spend hours disagreeing about, we agree in 10 minutes. Golf. And this is true, you know, I must emphasize this to you. If you read the book, I give you concrete examples of how golf changed the chemistry of Southeast Asia. So let me come to my fourth point. So what has ASEAN delivered? Here it has delivered three big things, three P's. The first P is peace. And you know, I began the talk by describing how Southeast Asia was by far one of the most troubled corners of planet Earth, in what the most troubled corner of planet Earth in the 1960s. Today, Southeast Asia is probably the second most peaceful region in the world, after maybe say Europe and North America, the West areas. But in some ways, actually, ASEAN is doing a better job than the European Union at creating peace, because I can tell you that when the Cold War ended in 1990, you had the Balkans of Europe and you had Southeast Asia, which is described as the Balkans of Asia. Everyone thought at the end of the Cold War, the Balkans of Europe would be at peace and the Balkans of Asia would go to war. Guess what? The exact opposite happened. The Balkans of Europe saw some incredibly bitter conflict. The Balkans of Asia remained at peace. And what's even more remarkable is that throughout the Cold War, Vietnam fought viciously against the ASEAN countries, right? For over 20 years. The Cold War ended. Within a few years, Vietnam had joined ASEAN. That's an amazing story. And if you look at how badly Europe is handling Russia since the end of the Cold War, Europe can learn lessons from ASEAN on how you manage former adversaries. No other regional organization has done as good a job as ASEAN has. Second thing that ASEAN has delivered is prosperity. And here, let me just give you one simple fact. I mentioned to you how ASEAN was a group of 5 very poor developing countries, now combined together. The 10 ASEAN countries are already the 7th largest economy in the world, and by 2050 will become the 4th largest economy in the world. That's shocking. To take one of the poorest regions on planet Earth and to make it so prosperous is amazing. And India's population, and as you know, India is doing quite well. India's population is twice that of ASEAN. But ASEAN's middle class population is bigger than India's. That's an illustration of how well we are doing. And the third P that ASEAN has delivered is that it has provided a platform for great power engagement. And if I want to say that there's one thing, one aspect of ASEAN that is the most undersold aspect of ASEAN, it is that ASEAN has not just created a chemistry of peace within Southeast Asia, it has shared that chemistry of peace with the larger Asia-Pacific region. And as you know, China and Japan have had troubled relations. Even today, they're still troubled. But whenever China and Japan get into a quarrel, and they're going to find a face-saving way to meet each other, where do they break the ice? They come to the ASEAN +3 meetings, and then on the sidelines of an ASEAN meeting, they have breakfast with each other. So we have contributed to peace, not just to Southeast Asia, but to the larger East Asia region. And there are many such stories that you can tell of what ASEAN has done in terms of providing a platform for great power engagement. And just for your information, as you know, North Korea is a member of very few clubs, but one club that it belongs to is the ASEAN Regional Forum. And often it's the only place where you can actually talk to North Korea. That's what ASEAN does. So, finally, my fifth and final point. What are the lessons for Central Asia? Now, I want to emphasize, quite honestly, that I'm not an expert on Central Asia. I'm sure there are many significant differences between Central Asia and Southeast Asia, but my brief understanding of history is that Southeast Asia has seen far more conflict than Central Asia has. So you may be better off, maybe easier for you to start regional cooperation here. And here I want to emphasize a very key point. The biggest mistake that Central Asia would make is to look at the European Union as the model for regional cooperation. The European model has worked very well, but it works well in Europe, among a group of very highly developed countries belonging to one culture. But if you're looking for an organization of developing countries with many cultures, then the only model is ASEAN. And I would say there are three things that possibly Central Asia could learn from ASEAN. The first is inclusivity. Now, many in the West like inclusivity. In theory. In practice, they don't like it. I'll tell you a simple true story, which you can read in the last chapter of the book. You know, ASEAN decided that we would welcome all members of Southeast Asia to join ASEAN. We didn't care what their history and background was. Geography was the only qualification. So we admitted Myanmar. Myanmar was then run by a military regime that had cracked down on its people, and because ASEAN admitted Myanmar, the EU stopped talking to ASEAN and said, what a stupid decision ASEAN made to admit this military regime of Myanmar into ASEAN. That was 20 years ago. Now, let me tell you a simple story. Right? There are two countries that have had military governments for a long time. One is Syria, and the other is Myanmar. The West took care of Syria with sanctions, threats, bombing. ASEAN took care of Myanmar with dialogue, engagement, and admission. Look at the results. You think the West did a better job with Syria? Or look at what ASEAN has done with Myanmar. It's an absolute political miracle of the highest order. We have taken a long-standing military regime and triggered a peaceful transition. And today, Myanmar is taking off. That's what ASEAN does. So inclusive is very critical. Second principle is be flexible. The one big difference between ASEAN and the European Union is that the European Union is one of the most rigid, legalistic organizations in the world. Everything has to be negotiated legally to documents which are this high. And just watch Brexit. See how rigid the negotiations are. ASEAN agreements are 3 or 4 pages. Very flexible. And if 10 countries cannot join, we say, no problem. Let's have the ASEAN minus X principle. We go first, you two, you come later. No problem. Flexibility. Just look at how much better off the EU would be if it could be flexible. All you could do is tell UK, go take a holiday. For 5 years, 10 years. We give you a holiday. Come back when you're ready. Instead, you got to engage in this incredibly painful, detailed legal negotiations, which will end in disaster. Disaster for the UK and disaster for the EU because they're rigid and legalistic and inflexible. Exact opposite of ASEAN. And the final thing that is, I think, a lesson that we learn from ASEAN is that ASEAN is imbibed and the Javanese culture of musyawarah and mufakat. These are Indonesian words which mean consultation and consensus. Very simple. But that Javanese Indonesian culture has penetrated ASEAN. So the Christian countries, the Buddhist countries, the non-Islamic countries have all accepted this Indonesian concept of consultation and consensus. And trust me, it's the exact opposite of the view.
School of Mind and Geoscience, Nazarbayev University. My question is, can you mention 3 or maybe 5 today, the main goals that ASEAN wants to achieve within the next 50 years? Because you mentioned the brief history, what it's done, what it's doing, any plans for the future? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I tell you the good news about ASEAN is that even though it's a third world organization, it has a pretty good website of its secretariat. And the website actually captures all the goals that have been agreed to for the future. And ASEAN actually is remarkably ambitious. I mean, I'll give you an example. They're trying to create they have announced an ASEAN economic community, right? Greater and greater integration among the ASEAN countries. Now, let me give you one big secret about ASEAN, okay? ASEAN always promises to do X, but it never delivers X. In fact, ASEAN has got a fantastic track record for not implementing many of the agreements. But that's a good thing, because they don't try to change everything overnight. So I always compare ASEAN to a crab, It moves like a crab. It takes 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, 1 step sideways. If you watch ASEAN, it's always in slow motion, it's going around in circles. But if you slice ASEAN decade by decade, ASEAN GNP, 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, it keeps growing. So there's a kind of ASEAN way. They make all kinds of promises. And sometimes, amazingly enough, the promises are implemented, which is always a big surprise. So, like for example, ASEAN has announced a very ambitious plan for ASEAN connectivity. More roads, more railways, more grid and so on and so forth. Some of it will be implemented, some of it will not be implemented. But at the end of the day, I think there's absolutely no doubt that many of the projects it is working on, the ASEAN Economic Community, ASEAN has also signed more free trade agreements than I think almost any other organization in the world. It has signed free trade agreements with China, with Japan, with South Korea, with Australia, New Zealand, with India, I think negotiating one with the EU, I think. So it is actually doing quite a lot in these areas. So over time, the vision for ASEAN is spelled out in many of these documents that you will end up creating a very integrated economy with a lot of collaboration in many areas. And that's what the vision of ASEAN is.
Thank you. Next.
I'm Lee from Mechanical Engineering. Is ASEAN going to invite Taiwan to become a member?
Well, I mentioned to you that for ASEAN, the main qualification is geography. If you are in Southeast Asia, you will get in. And the next country that will get in, probably, that has been knocking on the doors to join is Timor-Leste, East Timor, which used to be part of Indonesia. But some of us have told Timor-Leste, don't rush to join. Because one of the amazing things about ASEAN is that it's become so successful that it has 1,000 meetings a year, 3 meetings a day. Timor-Leste doesn't have enough officials to send for 1,000 meetings a year. You know, I'm serious. So it's not ready yet. So, but in the case of Taiwan, I'm afraid that leaving aside the profound political problems, which I'm sure you're aware of, Taiwan doesn't qualify to be part of Southeast Asia. It's part of Northeast Asia, linked to China and Japan and all, but not to Southeast Asia. So I am afraid that will not happen.
Next question. Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm very delighted for your lecture, and I'm so grateful to be here. And so my name is Leila. I'm a modest researcher at Nazarbayev University, and my question will be in relation to Central Asia. Would you consider that integration in the region, or joining in an organization, or establishing an organization, would be a prerequisite for, let's say, acceleration of economic development of the region?
Well, I think, this is where I'm going to expose my ignorance of Central Asia. See, the big question you have is that is your impetus for regional cooperation going to be delivered just by the states in Central Asia, or is it going to be delivered by your two big neighbors, China and Russia? And as you know, China has set up the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which seems to be working very well, but I think it will be driven by China. And then, of course, the question is, there's also a very complicated history within Central Asia and Russia. You can never ignore this complicated history. How much of a role do you want Russia to play? And the amazing thing about Southeast Asia is that we do have in Southeast Asia one very large country, Indonesia. Out of 600 million people, 250 million are Indonesian, almost 50%. And Indonesia could have done exactly, by the way, I'm being very undiplomatic, I'm naming countries and all that here. Indonesia could have behaved like a regional bully. It could have done what India tried to do in South Asia. SAARC has not taken off because India is too big. The Organization of American States has not taken off because America bullies the Latin American countries. What's remarkable in Southeast Asia is that Indonesia decided not to take on the leadership of ASEAN. Indonesia said, let the small countries lead ASEAN. So Thailand would make proposals, Malaysia would make proposals, Singapore would make proposals. And the Indonesians had a very benign policy of non-interference. And that was one of the key reasons why ASEAN succeeded. Because the biggest country decided not to bully its neighbors. And that is, of course, quite remarkable. It's partly due to the personality, as I mentioned, of President Suharto. The Western media has demonized President Suharto, but he was in many ways a very wise man in his handling of the region. And that's also why ASEAN took off. So you've got to decide in Central Asia how much of your regional cooperation is going to come from the relatively smaller countries, and how much of it is going to be driven by China or by Russia. And that's a big political decision you have to make.
Thank you. Next. In the back, gentleman.
Thank you. Venkat Subramanian, Graduate School of Business. Thank you for a wonderful talk. My question is that you mentioned that prosperity is one of the outcomes of the ASEAN history so far, and what do you think, in your personal view, is the prosperity due to ASEAN, or is it because of country-specific policies that countries undertook? So in a way, the question is whether regional cooperation and integration, is it a substitute for country-specific reforms that we need to do to improve prosperity?
You're absolutely right. Sorry, I'm looking for a quote. I'm going to read a quote to you in a minute. The prosperity is always due to your national efforts. So if you don't do the right thing at home, you're not going to succeed. But what's remarkable is that ASEAN creates an enabling environment. And you know what's amazing? Just to illustrate this to you, the one country that experienced, I think, more war than most countries since World War II has been Vietnam, right? Vietnam has been fighting almost continuously from the Second World War, I would say, until 1990 when the Cold War ended. And then this country that had only known conflict suddenly had to switch from being a country that focused on military methods of success to switching to economic development. It's not easy, you know. In fact, I can tell you, when Mr. Lee Kuan Yew met the leaders of Vietnam in the 1990s, he said, you mustn't ambush your foreign investors. It's true. He said, if you make a deal with the foreign investors, if they say yes, it doesn't mean you did the wrong thing in agreeing with them. You must respect the agreement. Don't ambush them and change the terms of the agreement, because that's what you used to do when you fought wars. And as a result of that, let me tell you what the president of World Bank said in 2016. Jim Yong Kim, he said, open quotes, Vietnam's development achievements over the last 25 years are remarkable. Over this period, the lives of the Vietnamese people have changed dramatically. We have seen economic growth averaging nearly 7%, which enabled Vietnam, one of the world's poorest countries in the 1980s, to leapfrog to middle income status in a single generation. In an especially remarkable achievement, Vietnam has reduced extreme poverty from 50% about 25 years ago to just 3% today. Quote, I can assure you of one thing. If Vietnam had not joined ASEAN, this would not have happened.
Thank you.
ASEAN played a very critical role.
Sorry.
Professor Mahbubani, my name is Herbol. I'm from National Antica Center. Thank you very much, first of all, for your great lecture. I have a question. We all know that G Summit ended recently in Italy. And you mentioned a new world, Asia coming to play a bigger role in this world. What do you think, how global economy, how the world is going to be developing after this G Summit?
Well, when the Economist once wrote a column about me, the first line said, for a diplomat, Kishore Mahbubani is remarkably rude. So I'm going to be very rude. There are sunrise organizations in the world and there are sunset organizations in the world. Let's be very clear about it, okay? ASEAN is a sunrise organization. ASEAN's role is going to become bigger and bigger in the world, right? The G7 is a sunset organization. It represents yesterday's powers. It should have been shut down when the G20 was created. But it is the last hurrah. And I don't have the statistic here, but if you go to my website, the website will compare the combined GNP of G7 versus what it's called the emerging 7. In 1950, the G7 was 3-4 times the size of the E7. by 2050, the E7 will be much bigger than the G7. It's a remarkable reversal of history. So the G7 is not the answer to any of the world's problems. And one of the worst strategic decisions the G7 made was to suspend Russia. That made it even less relevant to the world. And as you know, there was a point in time when even the leaders of China and India would ask to be invited to G7 meetings, and they got very angry about being left on the sidelines. And now the leaders of China and India will never go to a G7 meeting. They'll go to G20 meetings, you know. So I would say my very rude answer to you is don't bother about the G7. They become irrelevant to the world.
Okay. The lady in pink in the middle.
Dina Ashgalieva, University of Reading, here visiting researcher at SHSS. My question is, you know, Kazakhstan in 2000 joined the customs union, and recently we progressed to economic union. And I know the plan is to make it monetary union because Russia wants to become less dependent from US dollar. But I see ASEAN, like you said, 50 years, and I think it's still customs union, right? So they are not rushing to progress to monetary union.
So your question is?
Do you have plans to set a single currency?
Oh,
because
ASEAN.
Kazakhstan.
For ASEAN or for Kazakhstan?
Yeah, or maybe lessons for Kazakhstan because
Okay.
Kazakhstan wants to set.
Well, I can tell you that after the problems that the European Union has had with monetary union, ASEAN will not touch monetary union. ASEAN learns lessons from the mistakes of others, and this is the great strength of ASEAN. It's very pragmatic and very flexible. Very pragmatic. So if it works, we will do it. If it doesn't work, we won't do it. So monetary union cannot work. It's too complicated. And even, by the way, we don't even have a customs union. I must emphasize this. Because we don't have a common tariff around ASEAN. We only have a free trade area where we get preferential access to each other. But the tariffs in Singapore are 0, and the tariffs in Indonesia maybe 5%, you know. So we don't have a single customs union also. So we are very pragmatic in what we do. And also I can tell you that, as I indicated earlier, sometimes we will promise to do something, and then we don't do it. That's okay. Eventually we will do it. So that's the culture of flexibility I would encourage for this region. Don't get too upset if things are not implemented right away. Be patient. And over time, if the trust develops, then things begin to happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Shigeo. Kishore, that's a great presentation, and I really look forward to reading the book. But I have one question. I lived through the East Asian crisis in Indonesia as World Bank director there. What was how did the ASEAN let this happen? And second, what was ASEAN's role during this extremely difficult period?
That's a very good question, Dennis. And in fact, I should have mentioned, by the way, that the history of ASEAN is not one straight road upwards. ASEAN has gone up, gone down, and ASEAN has gone through some near-death experiences. And I think one of the near-death experiences was what you experienced, Dennis, in the 1997-98 financial crisis. And I was then the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If ASEAN had broken in 97-98, I wouldn't have been surprised. It was a real shock to the region. I mean, Malaysia's GNP shrunk, Thailand's GNP shrunk, Indonesia's GNP shrunk. And the region looked as though it was finished. But what was remarkable is that despite the shock that the region took, they carried on with ASEAN. And they carried on with ASEAN economic liberalization. And I can tell you one country played a very important role in helping ASEAN through that crisis, and that was China. Because China could have devalued its currency, and that would have been another big shock to ASEAN. Chu Rongji decided, no, China will stand firm, we will pay a price, but we will help Southeast Asia. And people remember that. By contrast, as you know, when Japan wanted to set up the Asian Monetary Fund, the United States Treasury blocked it. So China was then seen as a friend in need. But what is more remarkable, by the way, the financial crisis was 97, 98. Exactly 3 years later, China completely shocked Southeast Asia, the ASEAN countries. Because the ASEAN countries thought that the first country to propose a free trade agreement to Southeast Asia should have been one of their Western partners. Should it be United States, Japan, maybe UK, maybe, But guess what? The first country to propose a free trade agreement to ASEAN was China. And China didn't just propose a free trade agreement, China gave an early harvest of unilateral concessions that enable a surge of exports from ASEAN to China. And so I would say that that near-death experience was helped a lot by China. And that's why you find that China's influence in Southeast Asia, by the way, has grown significantly. And the big challenge that ASEAN faces now, and I haven't touched about it, I discussed it in the book at great length, is how ASEAN manages rising US-China geopolitical rivalry. And that's the biggest threat that ASEAN faces today.
Thank you. We have one more question from
Adi is going to ask me a very different question.
Not at all, not at all. Thank you, Kishore, for your marvelous presentation. Looking at other continents, with Africa as an example, there are 53 countries or so in Africa, and they've tried forming various organizations one after the other without any success, at least from my point of view. Do you think having an organization with 53 members all at the same time is worthwhile, or they should break up into regional segments? And so maybe West Africa, East and the South. I know they've done something like that before, but what would be your recommendation for? And of course, you may not perceive the diversity in Africa. Africa is actually regarded as very, very diverse. The only thing that unites them is pigmentation. Okay, really.
Well, you're absolutely right about Africa being very diverse too. But at the same time, you can recognize an African. You cannot recognize a Southeast Asian. We never look the same. So, I would say for Africa, even in ASEAN, there are multiple levels of engagement. So we have ASEAN, right? But in addition to ASEAN, we have ASEAN plus 3. Then we have ASEAN plus 6. And then we have ASEAN plus 8. And now ASEAN plus 10. And then we also have the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC. But not all ASEAN countries are member of that. And then you have something new being done, which is the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership, RCEP, that may take off. That's ASEAN plus 6. And then, of course, America had proposed something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And that would have been America's, frankly, last opportunity to retain its significant influence in the economic dimension in East Asia. Unfortunately, Donald Trump made an absolutely stupid geopolitical decision to walk away from TPP. He has significantly damaged America's standing in the region by walking away from TPP. So you see, what I'm telling you is that ASEAN countries belong to many clubs. So I would recommend for Africa, you have, for example, ECOWAS, right? So, for West Africa. So have all these sub-regional organizations maybe develop faster. So have an ECOWAS free trade area, for example. To get a free trade area among 53, very difficult. To get ECOWAS free trade area is more possible. So try and get cooperation at different units. And of course, you remember the ASEAN minus X principle. So you can have ECOWAS minus X principle. So maybe 3 countries in ECOWAS are ready to do free trade agreement. You start first, the rest can join later. So that's why the ASEAN principles of flexibility and pragmatism are very relevant to the developing countries. And it's actually quite shocking how ASEAN is so far ahead any other regional organization anywhere in the developing world. No one comes close. 1,000 meetings a year. And they have cooperation in all kinds of areas. My colleague, Ambassador Tomiko, who's actually also an expert on ASEAN, said once, he said he had heard about ASEAN cooperation in fisheries, ASEAN cooperation in agriculture, ASEAN cooperation in Ministry of Defense. He said, Kishore, one day I was shocked to discover there's an ASEAN meeting of pediatric surgeons. Pediatric surgeons? Yeah, very specialized. There's an ASEAN meeting also about that. So ASEAN has really gone down to many areas, which is quite remarkable for a group of developing countries.
Thank you. Allow me the prerogative of asking you one last question, maybe. That is the Belt and Road Initiative and the impact on ASEAN on one side. Of course, we're talking a lot about Belt and Road here in Central Asia. But how do you see the relationship with China being managed in terms of the Belt and Road angle, but also the question of bilateral versus multi-ASEAN-wide relationships with China?
Well, I mean, the answer to that is very simple, because what's confusing about the Belt and Road is that the road is over the sea and the belt is over the land. But the road is over the sea. And I think if the ASEAN countries are smart, the Belt and Road Initiative will give ASEAN a big boost. Because one of the key elements of the Belt and Road Initiative is connectivity. And ASEAN actually has a very detailed connectivity plan. And so the ASEAN connectivity plan can be linked to the BRI connectivity. You will see in due course a fast train all the way from Beijing right through Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Malaysia to Singapore. It's going to come.
It existed before.
Sorry?
It already existed before the BRI.
Well, I mean, it's not one track, as you know, all the way down. So that's something that can happen. So I think basically the ASEAN countries should see BRI as another big boost to the ASEAN countries, but the important thing about the ASEAN countries, I'm going to end with this very shocking thing for all of you. The secret of ASEAN's success is that ASEAN is very promiscuous with its partners. It doesn't believe in having a single mistress. It believes in having many mistresses. So we will work with China, we will work with America, we will work with India, we will work with Europe, we will work with Japan, we will work with Australia. So that's the secret of ASEAN's success.
You also remember what somebody asked yesterday.
Yes.
Anyway, many thanks. I think it was a great. Thank you, Robert, for very pertinent and interesting questions. Thanks again. Thank you.
Timor.
Yeah.
You know what exactly what Timor is?